Among youth, mental health struggles are a pressing problem, and as the pandemic persists, feelings of isolation and loneliness in adolescents are reported to have intensified over time. According to a recent poll, almost 45% of young people.
We've seen increases in our eating disorder admissions, our psychiatry admissions, emergency department mental health crisis visits have increased.
This shows just how much demand for mental health services for children and youth has increased.
You know, my friends are like, oh, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. Oh, I'm not eating well. And it's just like, oh, it's university life. But like, should that be the case, you know? So there's healthy levels of stress in it, and people do feel anxious at times, which is like normal, but if it's a constant thing, that's when people need to like step back and be like, hey, like this is not good for my mental health. And I think that's where the point needs to be. I think that line needs to be a bit clearer, because I think, like I said, like with university life, obviously there's a level of stress and anxiety, but there comes a point where it's like, hey, this is not healthy. So I think, sure, there's that mindset of, oh, it's just university, like whatever, but like also people need to look at their behavior and see like what patterns are being formed.
When the pandemic came around, I exercised less, I went outside less, I spent less time with friends. You spend less time in the sun just with natural light. They all have such a cumulative effect that can lead to the development of that poor mental health. And I saw that specifically where at the start of last year, for sure, where we were trying to go through a complete transition into online schooling with no sport or practices available and really not many people to talk to. You were stuck in a room watching your screen all day.
So much loss, so much grief in the student population that how can it not affect you? I mean, your group in this day in our history is already dealing with a lot of existential pressure that has already created a lot of existential despair. And certainly the pandemic has just added to that in a very big way. And all the grief, all the loss, all the things that should not be have really compounded that. So yeah, absolutely, it's going to affect, and it's going to affect for time to come.
I think there's a bit of hesitancy with Black Canadians or just Black people in general when it comes to reaching out for help because they're afraid of how they'll be received. Representation obviously like helps a lot in like all aspects of, you know, different industries and especially with healthcare. And I think too, a person who feels like you can't find representation, it's almost like pointless. You kind of feel like, what's the point going through the process if I'm not going to find someone who can understand where I'm coming from? So that's also discouraging, I'd say.
Athletes are expected to somehow compete and just overcome all of the challenges that they face and the issues that they normally would. Be expected to man up and kind of rise to the challenge.
I found that when I was like struggling the most, I really didn't want to get prescribed antidepressants at first until like I needed it. And as soon as I called my doctor, she was just like, oh, you're having a rough go, like do you need me like prescribe something? Like, let's try this. And I was like, okay. I kind of wanted like a different approach first.
In my day, when I was shy. In your day, you've got social anxiety, right? You know, so we've done all kinds of things that have created very, what appear to be very tidy categories that sort of symptomatize and categorize our human condition. But when you expose it to scientific scrutiny, it falls apart, right? And it does not, at the end of the day, help someone find their way to long-term well-being.
A lot of people, or a lot of doctors more, think of it as like a solution to everyone's problems.
It's a conversation that has been going on in the field for a few years, and it's certainly something that you see in this population. The goal of that step care model is to provide self-help resources, interactive technology to address mental health, workshops that are psychoeducational, and therapeutic workshops, which are very different, before we even get to that stage of diagnosis and medication.
Mental health is one thing to talk about, but it's another thing to take action on. You know, doing the most simple tasks will feel like so hard. Like sending out an email and reaching out for help, that's the hardest part.
Western has done a better job of providing a general increased access to mental health resources, especially this year with all of our ongoings. The resources might exist, but they don't know where to find them, and that's a big issue that we can try and address, and it's an easy one too.
They should push more to make that accessible, because like when you're at university and if it's covered in your tuition, then like students will have the chance or that freedom to get that help without their parents knowing.
Even when I was prescribed the antidepressants and everything, there was never like a pressure for me to do them. It was just like they're there if I want to use them as another tool. How I thought about them was like they gave me the time to use the coping strategies I learned.
We have open slots every day, up to 4 to 5, sometimes 6, for crisis appointments. For people who come in and they're feeling overwhelmed on the high end of crisis, but a different kind of sort of mid-level crisis as well, right? Something adverse has happened at home and they're struggling to cope. And no student has to do this alone. And so we want to really encourage, my whole team is really sending this message. We really want students to feel that no door at Western is the wrong door, and we're here to support. So you belong here, you should be here, but let's talk about how we keep you here.